definitely a real honor to be here. Absolutely appreciate the convention for having me. Thanks to Bill for asking me to speak, and also thanks to everybody for coming in here and listening to my 2 cents worth. So, in putting this presentation together, I feel like I'm a little loud. Here, I get it. I got it. In putting this presentation together, I sort of considered the crowd. There's no way for me to know who's going to be here today. But I'm going to be talking about landscape astrophotography, and I sort of made the assumption that there's probably people in the room here that know as much or more than I do on the subject, and that's cool. They want to hear my planning process, okay? But I also would assume that there's probably people in here that have no idea what we're talking about. There's probably people in here that's never picked up a camera, and that's cool too. So considering that dynamic, I put this presentation together. I thought, well, it's a better idea for me to lay a little bit of groundwork and just talk about what are nightscapes, what are some of the techniques used to obtain these images, and sort of get everybody up to speed before we dive into the planning of landscape astrophotography. So with that, let's jump right in it. So a landscape astrophoto is often referred to as a nightscape. And I didn't coin that term. I'm not really sure who did. I know that Royce Bayer has a group on Facebook called the Nightscapers. And so that term's been around for a little while. But obviously a nightscape is just a landscape photo taken, you guessed it, at night, right? So, but what counts as a nightscape? Well, any landscape taken at night, but some examples of some of these images. This would be a classic image. That's my wife Nikki there in the foreground. And just a Milky Way core with some kind of foreground interest. And obviously I'm interested in that. This is an example of a nightscape. Another example would be the moon. I took this photo, I was 10 miles away from Snowshoe Ski Resort, and I'm standing on the scenic highway using a telephoto lens there. So there's no manipulation there. I'm just so far from the moon it appears to be huge, overlying those buildings. So that's another example of a nightscape. And then deep space objects. This gets into the tracking and using narrowband filters and all that stuff. But nightscapes over top of a landscape. This was taken at Hanging Rock near John's hometown. That's another example of a nightscape. So, where did landscape astrophotography start? Well, what do you need to do landscape astrophotography? Well, you need a camera, you need a wide-angle lens, and you need a tripod. That's all you need. And so, this was the very first photo I ever took of the Milky Way core. And I'm sure even some of you guys that do deep space astrophotography now, maybe this was the first time you ever did astrophotography, was you set up a camera out in the yard and took a picture of the Milky Way core, and it was just like, whoa, And this was the very first time I ever got a picture, and it's, obviously I just drove down the road and set my tripod up on the side of the road and shot toward the south, and was just, mind blown, right? And obviously there's a lot to be desired there in that shot. It's just a bush in the foreground that looks like a car or something driving by. Most of the foreground is completely clipped to black. The white balance is completely off. But to me, when I took it, that was a masterpiece, right? So, but this is all you need, and this is where it starts, okay? And where does it go? Well, this is my daughter Isabella. This is the one that's upset about being at the Nerd Fest. But she was helping me this night. And, obviously I'm using a small sky tracker and, shooting panoramas. We've talked about the stacking, that's sort of where it goes. And maybe it seems extreme for landscape astrophotography. I think about all my buddies at work. All those guys are deer hunters, all the guys I work with. Well, what do you need to go deer hunting? A gun, right? What? Deer, yeah, well, yeah, you can hunt for them though. So you need a gun, but all the guys I work with, they have game cameras, and they have, deer feeders in the woods, and they're, washing their clothes in detergent that doesn't have a scent, and then they're rubbing doe piss all over themselves before they go into the wood. It just gets a little bit extreme. And so this might be a little bit extreme, I guess, for landscape astrophotography, but I guess at least I'm not rubbing deer piss on myself. So some terms used in describing nightscapes. So a single is just what it sounds like. It's a single exposure. It's generally going to be a long exposure. It may be processed, it may even be heavily processed, but it's one single exposure. And these terms are sort of used in some of these, especially in these Facebook groups, because people want to know, what am I looking at? How was this image obtained? Does that make sense? They want to know, is this some sort of composite? Is this a single image, or what is it, right? So this is one of the terms used as a single, that's just a single exposure. Another term is a blend, and that is separate exposures for the foreground and the sky. So at least one photo for the sky, at least one photo for the foreground, but it may be multiple photos for both, okay? But a blend would be one photo for the sky, one for the foreground, shot same location, same photo length, okay? And then stacked, we've talked about stacked for the last couple hours. You guys are familiar with that. Stacking of the sky exposures, no different in landscape astrophotography. And then tracked, this just tracked using an equatorial mount. Now, a final image, you look at a final image, and most of mine are blended, stacked, and tracked, okay? And so an image might fall into more than one of those categories. And then you have the notorious composite image. And so that's where somebody maybe drives out to a dark sky location, they take a photo of the sky, and then they take this foreground somewhere else, and then they stick that sky over that foreground. Sometimes people will even use different focal lengths for the sky and the foreground. Now listen, there's nothing wrong with the composite image. If that's what you like doing it, then by all means keep doing that. But you understand, if you see that it's a composite image, then what we realize is that image doesn't necessarily represent reality, okay, if you will, okay? And I just want to talk about authenticity a little bit. So, when creating my final image, it's always my goal to have something that is authentic. And what I mean when I say authentic is I want the sky, in reference to the foreground, to be accurate in terms of size, in terms of orientation, in terms of location, okay? And so another thing that I look at when I think about authenticity is light pollution. And it sounds kind of funny because generally when we talk about light pollution, we're talking about that's the enemy, right? But anytime you take a photo of a long exposure of a landscape, you're going to have some glow coming off of the horizon, okay? And this particular image is a perfect example. This is a 180-degree panorama that I took at Green Bank. There you can see the telescope. But talking about light pollution, if you look at the left-hand side of the sky, you can see there's a glow in the sky. You can actually see in the trees here, the Green Bank Middle School and Grade School is right there. That's where that glow is coming from. And then you can see a glow on the right side, and that glow in the sky there is actually coming from the observatory's parking lot. There's lights there in the parking lot. And then there's a very interesting looking glow above the barn. And it appears to be extremely bright, okay? And this is a very dark sky location, by the way, but there's something in the sky that appears to be very bright, but it also appears to be quite a ways off in the distance. And that is the Snowshoe Ski Resort. And it's 10 miles away, but you're picking up that residual light. But here's the point that I'm making. That is authentic to this location. In fact, some of the people that I know that shoot there refer to that light as the Snowshoe Nebula. So, but this is, look, that's authentic to that location. Another thing when we talk about authenticity is I like to look at an image and say, you know what, yeah, that's actually where Orion sets. It sets on that barn. That's actually where the California Nebula sets. Or that's actually where the Milky Way rises. is this real? Okay? And they're not asking, is this real? Like, can I go see this with my eyes? What they want to know is that really up there? Is that what that really looks like? And because I know that I strive to create a final image that is accurate in terms of orientation, size, location, direction, then not only do I say, yeah, it's real, but it's actually more real than we can see, because the camera reveals a reality that is there, that is just as real as what we can see, but we just can't see it. So, but look, if you want an authentic image, then what you have to do is plan, okay? And that's what I want to talk about. You have to know where you need to be. You have to know when you need to be there, and you have to know what direction you need to be pointed in. And in addition to that, you need to know what camera, lens, equipment that you're going to have to use to capture the field of view that is needed. We'll see what happens with that. All right, so I'm going to stand over here so I can turn it down. So I'm going to primarily be talking about using Stellarium, PhotoPills, and Google Earth. Now look, this is my planning process. There might be somebody in here, now you watch my planning process, you're going to be like, that's the dumbest planning process in the world. Well, maybe you can give me some tips after this class, okay? But this is what I use. From time to time I'll use Telescopius also just for framing, but mostly I'm using Google Earth, Stellarium, and PhotoPills, and those are the programs I'm going to talk about today. So you're going to hear me reference this, and I'm sure some of you guys understand this, but I thought, I'll just touch on it real quick. You're going to hear me talk about azimuth and altitude, okay? Azimuth is just like a compass, okay? And 360 degrees would be north, and 180 degrees would be south, and that's always relative. I'm writing your camera in, and that's always relative to your location. Okay, so if this telescope is north to me now, if I move here, well, it's no longer at 360 degrees, it's at say 7 degrees. So it's always relative to your location. And then the same goes with altitude. At least in what I'm talking about today, we talk about altitude in degrees. This is always relative to your location, your position. So 0 degrees is always straight out from me. 45 degrees is like that, 90 straight up. Does that make sense? Okay, so everything I'm talking about, again, remember, always relative to your position, okay? So this is my first plan here. I'm just going to go through the entire plan. This is a ride over the Green Bank telescope. So I'm starting in Google Earth, and we'll zoom in here to the little town of Green Bank. And here is the telescope, and you're limited to where you can actually photograph the telescope. You have to go from the parking lot, which is about a mile away, okay? So I can actually zoom in here on Google Earth, and I can drop this little guy down, and if somebody's taking a 360 degree photo, you'll see the blue dots. I can drop him on the blue dot and get this real life view of that location. Now I wanted the telescope and the barn in the shot, and I didn't want a whole lot outside of that. So I wanted to capture those two subjects and then not a whole lot outside of that. So I'm going to go into PhotoPills to see what I need to do to capture that scene the way I want to. Now the orange pin represents my location. This is PhotoPills. This is an app on your phone. That's why it looks the way it does. The V coming off to the left is my field of view, okay? And my field of view in this particular shot, I decided to go with was 50 millimeters. I can enter that into PhotoPills, and then you can enter in I'm just using a crop sensor, Astro Modified Digital Rebel, And if I look out, you see the sort of lighted section of the screen. Does everybody see that? That's my field of view. And you can see I'm moving that around a little bit. And there's the telescope in the view. And then there's the barn. Okay? And so that's pretty much exactly what I wanted. That's about the field of view that I was interested in getting. Now the black pen represents my subject. And it's going to give me some information about it. From my position, it's 261 degree azimuth angle. Remember, 270 would be directly west, okay? So 260, we're going to need to remember that number, and it's 1.86 degrees lower than my position. So there's the barn. Remember, 261. We're going to have to remember that. So now we're going into Stellarium. Stellarium is free. You can get online and look at it, or you can download the app. Now in Stellarium, again, I've got my field of view entered in up here. This red box represents my field of view, okay? I usually get rid of the foreground, and what I do is I will open up this azimuth grid, and it's actually got altitude up the side and azimuth. I know that's hard to see. And then my date, and then my time, okay? So I knew that night I would be looking relatively west. So here's west. I was going to go out and shoot on January the 26th. So what I'm looking at is I'm just previewing the night. I'm saying, look, what's happening in that portion of the sky that night? Well, at 1:50 a.m., I can see that the Orion Nebula is setting in this region here, okay? So I'm like, okay, that might be an interesting sky. So I back up to about 245, 248, and there is the Orion Nebula. It's at 5 degrees altitude and 260 degrees. Where was the barn? Does anybody remember where the barn was? 261, right? So might have a plan together, right? So that means that Orion Nebula is going to set right on the barn. But remember, it's at 5 degrees altitude. So I'm going to go back into Google Earth, and I need to look at something. I need to know how high is that horizon, right? Because if that horizon is higher than 5 degrees, then this plan's not going to work, right? So how can I determine that? Well, there's probably several ways to determine that, but the quick way that I found, again, is using photo pills. And that is a paid app. It's like $10, I think. At least when I bought it, it was. So the dropped black pen will give me not only an azimuth angle, but it also give me an altitude difference. And that's the difference from my position to where the black pen is. So the barn was about a degree lower. The telescope itself is 0.62 degrees lower, but I need to know about this ridge line right here. Okay, so now it's 2.21 degrees higher there. So I'm just searching around that ridge line to make sure that the top of that ridge line is not higher than 5 degrees. And the highest that I found was 253. So it looks like my plan's going to work. Okay, so the same night that I was there shooting this, I set up another camera in a tripod. It was negative 5 degrees that night. That's not working, is it?
It's max.
So on January 27th, 2022, at approximately 2:45, this happened. So 260 degrees, 5 degrees. There's the barn. Remember the barn? 261, 5 degrees, top of the mountain. So if you noticed, I was imaging a setting deep space object, I guess if you were a setting target, I should say maybe. So how would you go about imaging a setting target? So this is my house, and let's say I wanted to take a picture of the Milky Way setting on my house. First of all, I couldn't because there's a car lot right behind me that's super bright, but let's say that it's not there, okay? So what I would do is I got my star tracker set up, it's polar aligned, and then I'll frame up my subject the way I want it, okay? Now this is considering that I've done my homework, right? And I know exactly where it's gonna set. So all I'm gonna do is I can use this dial on the back, and typically, you know, I'll track a deep space, a landscape photo like this for probably 30 minutes or so, but I might do more according to what it is. But then I can just rotate that in reverse, okay, based on how much time I want to get on it, and then I just track it back into position. And there's actually, and I'm sure most of you guys know this, but the time is on the back, and you could use that and just reference and say, hey, if it's going to set at midnight, I'll rotate back an hour at 11 o'clock if I want to shoot an hour, or whatever the case may be. So again, that's a setting deep space object. Now here's another plan. This is Cygnus over Seneca, and this will be a rising target. So that's a little bit easier to just set up, and then just once it's in position, you start tracking. That's pretty much it. So this is the little town of Seneca Rocks, which isn't too far from here. There's the actual rocks, okay? And this is the valley below. Now, unlike Green Bank, I wasn't limited to one spot, so I could pretty much shoot from anywhere in this valley. Instead of just looking at one location, I thought I would just look in this position. I'm looking east in this particular plan. I want to look at the eastern sky and see what's there anywhere, and sort of decide what I want to shoot over Seneca Rock. So we're here in Stellarium, and I'm going to kind of do the same thing that I did with Green Bank. Now, this is the same thing. I've got my field of view, but this time I'm using a 24 millimeter lens. Again, an astro-modified crop sensor camera. I get rid of that foreground, and I open up my azimuth grid, okay? Again, altitudes up the side and azimuth angles across the top. The bottom down here is my date and my time. This is March 28th. And so I'm just going to start flipping through the night. So there's 9:30, 10:30. I can start to see the Milky Way core around 3:30. And John was actually there with me this night. He shot the core, and I said, I'm going to do something different. And I decided to shoot the Cygnus region. So at 3:30, I can see the Cygnus region is sitting in the eastern sky, sort of northeast. So I'm going to look real close at the Veil Nebulous, because what I thought would be cool is I thought, well, I'd like to catch the Veil just cresting over the edge of Seneca Rocks. And so I'm going to look real close at where the Veil Nebula is, and it's at 62-degree azimuth angle and 15-degree altitude. Now, altitude really played a part in this particular plan because I'm looking at the top of a mountain, so I need to determine when it's going to rise over the top of that mountain. Okay, so Photo Pills is going to give me a location where I need to be to capture this scene. So again, the orange pin represents my location. The V off to the right or the east in this particular plan represents my focal length. That is the observation deck there at Seneca Rocks, and I thought, well, that's just a good place to start for sort of talking about this plan and how we put it together. So the top of the rocks from that observation point is 96-degree azimuth angle, but it's 22 degrees altitude difference. Now, does anybody remember what does my azimuth angle need to be on this one? Anybody remember? 60, what did we say, 61? Something like that, okay? So, but it needed to be 15 degrees, so that's not gonna work. So I can just move my orange pin around. And sometimes you just have to sort of hunt for a spot. You know what I mean? Just move the orange pin around until you find a spot where this is going to work. So what I ended up settling with was this location here. And you can see if I drop the orange pin there, I've got the black pin, which is my subject. It's at the top of Seneca Rocks,
right there, and from that point it's 14 degrees and 61. So that is exactly where the Veil Nebula should rise, from that given location, okay? And so that's where I ended up shooting from. Now, I hadn't actually ever stood right there at that spot, and so I wanted to see what it was gonna look like. Unfortunately, nobody had taken any 360-degree photos from that particular spot, so I didn't get the blue dot, but I can still drop this guy down here and sort of get a street view, and it'll just give me an idea of what that scene's gonna look like before I'm there, okay? So then on March 29th, 2022, approximately 3:30, this happened. Do what?
It's a tool starting point.
Yeah.
Very north.
Yeah, oh yeah. And there's the final image. And I actually have that particular photo over here as one of the raffle prizes, so if anybody be interested in the print. All right, let's do one more. This one's a little bit simpler. This is the moon over the Capitol, and I'm not going to need Stellaria for this one at all. I'll just use photo pills and Google Earth. So this was my daughter Olivia's idea. It's a pretty good idea, so she helped me with this, and or I helped her with this. But again, the black pen represents my subject, which in this case was the Capitol building. My orange pen represents my location. So what I wanted to do was capture the moon over the Capitol. This blue line represents where the moon will rise, okay? And then the thin blue line represents where the moon is based on the time. And I can change the time by sliding this little slider back and forth. It'll move the time, and as I slide that, this blue line is going to move. You understand? So that's going to move as I slide the time back and forth. So right here it's telling me the moon height at 6:55 is 42 meters, and that information is up here on the top. Now what I need to know is, well, how tall is the Capitol building? Because that black pen doesn't represent the top of the Capitol. The black pen represents the ground. Okay, so the West Virginia Capitol is 89 meters high. So now, and this took me a while to just search around photo pills, dropping that orange pen around and moving the timeline around until I found a spot where the Capitol and the moon was going to intersect, okay? And so I need the moon to sit at an 89 meter height, and I need that thin blue line to intersect with the top of the Capitol right as it's hitting 89 meters. And this is where I ended up actually taking the photo from. And I'm making it look real easy on here, but it took me a long time to actually find that spot. And you can see this is actually the thin, it looks thick there because I'm zoomed in, but that, if you see, there's a thin blue and then you see the sort of shaded area around it, that's actually the size of the moon. So right here, you can see right here, 89 meters, 6:43 p.m. So now all I gotta do is just be there, okay? But I'm also gonna look at my field of view on here. You can see the lines on both sides. I'm shooting with a 400 millimeter lens on a Sony a7 II full frame camera there. And I wanted to try to get as far away from the Capitol as I could, because that sort of gives the illusion that the moon's real huge, you know, in the scene compared to the Capitol. And right there I'm about 1.2 kilometers. This gives me a distance from orange pen to black pen. So I want to look at Google